Hello, everyone, and welcome to a candidate forum for the general election for Minnesota House District Representative Districts 3B, 8A, and 8B. My name is Susan Nelson. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Duluth and a trained and certified League of Women Voters moderator. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Duluth, I'd like to thank the candidates for their willingness to participate in government and in this general election forum for the office of Minnesota House of Representatives in District 3B, 8A, and 8B. Since we have candidates for 3 different districts, candidates may wish to mention which district they're running for a couple of times during their remarks, or refer to their district with a geographical description of it. The forum will be presented on PACT-TV and linked to the League of Women Voters of Duluth website. The League posts complete, unedited recordings of forums. Editing is authorized only for official media reporting. Excerpts or edited clips of candidate forums may not be used for partisan political purposes. You may share this forum in its entirety. The League of Women Voters believes that an informed citizenry is the foundation of effective democracy. The League is open to membership for men and women who are interested in nonpartisan civic participation. It's a volunteer organization working at the local, state, and national level to encourage citizens to participate in government. While we as a league do study and take stands on issues, we do not endorse or support political parties or candidates. The views expressed at this forum are those of the participating candidates and not those of the League of Women Voters of Duluth. And sponsorship of this forum is not a league endorsement of any of the individual candidates participating. The League of Women Voters of Duluth realizes that creative and innovative policies and practices are forged out of diverse points of view. We believe diverse perspectives are necessary for responsible and representative decision-making. So we will sustain our commitment to welcome and facilitate diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of our work. We strive to include people from a mix of abilities and backgrounds in all of our activities. At this time, I'd like to introduce the candidates running for the Minnesota State House of Representatives seats. Running in District 3B are Mark Munger and Natalie Zeleznikar. Natalie Zeleznikar could not be here today and has submitted an empty chair statement. Running in District A are Peter Johnson and Mark McGrew. Peter Johnson could not be here today and has also submitted an empty chair statement. Running in District 8B are Liish, Kozlowski, and Shawn, Savela. Our forum will begin with the candidates giving a 2-minute opening statement, followed by the questioning round. Questions have been vetted by a League of Women Voters of Duluth Forum Committee, questions submitted by League committees and by citizens on the League website. Candidates were not given the questions in advance. Each candidate will have up to 1.5 minutes in which to provide their responses to the questions. The questioning round has been set up so that each candidate will be asked questions in a rotating order. After the question round is completed, each candidate will be allowed a 2-minute closing statement prior to the end of the forum. The candidates will now provide their prepared opening statements, and we will begin with the 2 who are not here in alphabetical order. So I will read the statement from Pete Johnson running in District 8A. Thank you to the Duluth League of Women Voters for hosting this forum. I apologize for not being there in person today. I am traveling out of town to honor my friend and mentor, former Minnesota Professional Firefighters President and St. Paul Fire Captain Chris Parsons, who tragically died in the line of duty. This weekend, his name is being added to the International Association of Firefighters Fallen Firefighter Memorial in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Chris embodied what it means to serve and was a passionate advocate for firefighters, labor unions, and the middle class. He cared deeply about the people he served, and he's greatly missed. My desire to represent the people of District 8A is rooted in service. As a Duluth firefighter for 19 years, responding to our neighbors in their most vulnerable moments, I've gained a firsthand perspective on the challenges our community faces. With 2 daughters in middle school and a wife who is an elementary school teacher, I also have real-world insight into the issues affecting our students and families. Beyond my work as a firefighter, I've served as a board member and coach, continually stepping up to support our community. Through these experiences and through hundreds of conversations with people across the district, 4 key issues consistently stand out: access to safe and secure housing, affordable health care, quality education, and good jobs. These are the building blocks for success. By focusing on these core needs, we can help more people thrive and prevent the kinds of despair that may lead them to call someone like me for help. Success goes beyond simply identifying problems. It's about delivering results. I am uniquely positioned to translate my experiences and insights into action. Over the years, I've built strong statewide relationships, created coalitions, and served a diverse community, as shown by the numerous and wide range of endorsements I have received so far. With 16 years as a union officer, I've honed my skills as a negotiator, problem solver, and advocate. This combination of experience and dedication will enable me to hit the ground running and advocate effectively for you in St. Paul. Sincerely, Pete Johnson. And the opening statement from Natalie Zeleznikar, running in District 3B. Hi, I am Natalie Zeleznikar, State Representative for 3B. I am sorry I could not attend this year, but I had a prior commitment. I served seniors and families for over 30 years as a licensed nursing home administrator in the district I serve. I never knew who a Democrat, Republican, or independent was, and that never mattered. What mattered was a common goal of quality outcomes and creating a great place to live, work, and visit. I apply this same collaborative leadership style in St. Paul. I served on the Workforce, Children and Families, and Health and Human Services committees. My work experience was instrumental in ensuring Minnesota nursing homes received $300 million to help stabilize and prevent multiple closures. I authored 5 bills which passed to provide trade programs in our high schools to ensure we have a workforce who knows how to build homes with many retirees. I got a bill passed to increase the amount of graduating nurses, as we need 500,000 and graduate 50,000, and the U of M will lead this initiative for a nursing center of excellence. I was appointed to the Aging and EMS task forces as a bipartisan member to address immediate needs in greater Minnesota and the entire state. I will travel to Washington, D.C. September 25th and 27th with Senator Hochschild to address the ambulance issues for the EMS task force with all team members. I have the energy, passion, and commitment to continue seeking solutions for the best interests of our communities. All right, and now we will continue with opening statements from the candidates who are present, and we will begin with candidate McGrew.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate the offer to the League of Women Voters and PACT-TV for allowing me this opportunity. My name is Mark McGrew. I'm running for House District 8A, which is the western side of Duluth. I was born and raised in Duluth, and I currently live in the house that's been in my family since 1962 up in Piedmont Heights. I'm a 1986 graduate of Duluth-Denfield High School, and I have one older brother, Kevin, who lives in the area. Just this last April, I retired after a 28-year law enforcement career. I worked 3.5 years at the beginning of my career with the Superior, Wisconsin Police Department. And at the end of my career, I'd served 24 and a half with the Minnesota State Patrol, stationed outside right here in Duluth since 2000. In 2010, I retired from the United States Naval Reserve after nearly 24 years of service to our country and to the Navy. I also have experience serving as a union delegate with the State Patrol, Minnesota State Patrol Troopers Association. I served with the Troopers Association as a delegate for about 3 years. I've also served on 2 contract negotiation cycles on the negotiations team to improve pay and benefit for state law enforcement officers. I earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice that I finished in 2019. Going back to school while actively working gave me a better understanding of the criminal justice system and public safety. I wanted just to hone those skills even more during my career. I've been married for 25 years and have 2 boys. My wife, Heather, holds a doctorate in education and teaches at University of Wisconsin Superior. She's also a graduate in Duluth Enfield in 1990. And I have 2 boys who are in their respective years at their schools. My oldest son's a senior at Stout, and my youngest is a senior at Denfeld.
Oops, sorry. Is there some way you can not do that? Okay. Okay, thank you. Next, we'll hear from candidate Savela.
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 So close.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. And again, thank you all for having this forum. I think it's really important that people understand who the candidates are, what they stand for, because this is going to be a very important election. My name is Shawn Savela. I've gone through this a few times. I really want to direct people to my website, ShawnSavela.com, for more information. I'm just going to breeze through some of the highlights. I was born in Ely, and about 7 days old, I moved to Duluth, and I grew up in the same house we moved in that time. It was in rural Duluth. My dad was a Boilermaker in the union. My mom was a secretary for the city of Duluth. She was also in the union. So I grew up being around the union people, some of the best people in the world that I knew when I was growing up. I went to UMD, got my bachelor's of science, computer science, started my own business in '98, came back to Minnesota in 2017, and moved my business here, and that's where we've lived since 2017 with my wife, Dawn. I like to learn. I'm analytical in nature. I attack problems in a very analytical way. We get a problem's presented to you. You get information, you gather information, you get opinions of other people, you think about it, and then you decide what you're going to do and you take action. That's the way I approach every problem, and it's worked out pretty well so far. I want to talk about my approach to government, though, which I think is a little different than some people's. I think government is here for helping you with your personal freedoms, letting you do individual achievement. It's not here to be a paternalistic organization. I don't think it should be something that takes care of all of your problems. I think you're better served taking care of your own problems. And I ask a simple question to people when I'm door knocking. Would you rather receive $500 a month from the government or give $500 less a month to the government? Everybody I've talked to would rather just keep their money and do with it what they please instead of sending it to the big government hub and having them decide where they're going to be spending it. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have an opening statement from candidate Kozlowski.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Liish, aka Alicia Kozlowski, and I use they, them pronouns. I'm really proud to be here as your state representative for District 8B, that's Eastern Duluth, and also as your DFL and labor endorsed candidate, climate, reproductive justice, as well as Moms Demand Action, distinguished candidate, and many more. I'm really proud to be here as a kid who grew up in the streets of Duluth, my ancestral homelands to where I was born and raised, representing this community in what we know it as the center of all good things. And that's why I'm here again, because as somebody who lives now in Hunters Park neighborhood, as a first-gen homeowner with my daughter and my cats, I was somebody who was raised by a Mexican-American father. My father was a union electrician. My mom's a single Ojibwe mother who, with an 8th grade education, really made a living as a child care worker and as a housekeeper. And now as somebody who ran the streets, I call myself the rep who runs, a reluctant politician, as an ultra-marathoner. I hit the ground running in my first term, really successful stepping into leadership as the vice chair of our Minnesota Posse Caucus, as a co-founder of the Queer Caucus, passing over 20 bills that many were bipartisan with Republicans who understand that we need to work hand in glove to really deliver for Duluth, for greater Minnesota, and for the state. So I'm somebody who has no stranger to struggles, and I also know that we aren't just our struggle, that we're survivors and that we're victors. And my grandma and aunties who you'd know in Myers-Wilkins Elementary, having just a strong backing for educational commitment to creating an economy that lifts everybody up, to affordable childcare, to making sure that this is a place that everybody has a place to call home at night. Your priorities are my priorities, and whether it's bonding to quadrupling housing supply in Duluth to fighting for the local infrastructure needs, I am going to be somebody who continues to be that coalition bridger, that doer, the negotiator, and working hard for the people of Duluth. Your issues are my issues, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. And finally, we'll have an opening statement from candidate Munger.
Thank you. I'm Mark Munger. I live in Friedenberg Township, north of Duluth, about 20 miles. I've lived there for 40 years with my wife, Renee, of 46 years. We raised our 4 sons up there. They all went through the Hermantown school system. They were all active in Hermantown hockey, Hermantown soccer, Hermantown baseball, and in the school activities. I was a youth coach for 25 years in Hermantown. I currently sit on the Scouting Advancement Committee of the Voyageurs Boy Scouts Council, which means we basically pass on all of those scouts, both male and female now, who are trying to attain the rank of Eagle. I am an Eagle Scout. I'm honorably discharged from the United States Army Reserve. For 14 years, I was the city attorney for the city of Proctor, which meant I was the prosecutor and civil attorney for Proctor, and I was also in private practice. In 1998, I ran for and won a seat on the district court, and I was a district court judge for 20 years active, 3 years on senior status. I'm in this race for one reason: our grandchildren. I looked at the discourse and the name calling and the negativity that's been going on in our political sphere, and I don't think it behooves us as a country, culture, to go down this road further. I think it's time to restore some civility and common sense to government, and I think given the fact that I'm a trained attorney, trained judge, trained mediator, those are some traits that I can bring to St. Paul. My passions are public education, child care, elder care, health care, and economic development with an eye towards keeping our outdoor heritage. I'm an outdoorsman. I love to hunt and fish. And so that's what I think I can bring to the table. And we'll talk about my district later on as we get into this. It's a little different than the Duluth folks that are here.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Now we'll move to the questions that have been solicited by the organizing committee. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to respond, and we'll begin with candidate Munger. The first question is on education. Reports indicate that large numbers of students, in particular students from underrepresented groups, are not sufficiently proficient in reading and math, and that there are not sufficient course offerings in computer science. If elected, what, if anything, would you propose to do to remedy this?
So last session, and Representative Kozlowski can attest to this, we passed some historic budgeting for public education in Minnesota. That's a start. That's an attempt to bring us back to where we were pre-COVID. Not everything can be placed on the blame of COVID. And we do need to make sure that our kids are learning what they need to learn to be successful in life. And whether that is going to trade school, going to the military, going to college, going to a 2-year institution, they need those skills and they need that training and they need that background and support and foundation that they get from a good public education. So I agree with some of my Republican colleagues that throwing money at a problem doesn't necessarily solve a problem. But I think we do need to seriously fund public education and not look at voucher systems and things like that that we've seen across the country. Those do not promote the welfare of our children, and I would be opposed to those.
Okay, same question for candidate Kozlowski.
Thank you so much. It's a question that really drives why I came to the legislature and why I'm coming back as somebody who worked in education and higher ed, and as my family has spent their many years, as I mentioned, you'd know them in Myers-Wilkins Elementary, my grandmas and aunties. I grew up driving the streets of Duluth and just delivering food, checking in on community members who were struggling. And I think that what we did at the legislature last year in the most historic funding to fill the gaps, and that was a great start in terms of filling the hole. But when you have 20 plus years of decades of record disinvestment, we've filled the hole about a third of the way, and we have more to do. We did have COVID, we had a racial reckoning and economic crisis that we need to look at. Our kids don't come in pieces, and as somebody who comes from the communities that we're talking about, there were very big ways that actually a big credit to our Posse Caucus, to our education team, labor unions, and communities to be able to stabilize school funding and index the funding to inflation, but also do things like Indigenous education for all. That was funding that we need to make sure that our Native learners, our ethnic studies, that students see themselves reflected, that we're doing programs and investing in growing your own so that we have more adults in the classroom. I was a teacher, principal for the day at Lowell, and our students are really needing that social emotional support and putting food and making sure that kids have access to free breakfast and meals so that they can really come and be in the classroom instead of thinking about the stressors outside of the classroom.
Thank you. And candidate McGrew.
Yes, I come from a family of educators. Both my parents were Independent School District 709 teachers in the elementary education section. And then, like I mentioned before, my wife also holds a doctorate in education as well. So I'm very well versed in education, and I feel comfortable talking about it. So 2023 was a historic investment in education, certainly, but it came with many mandates that were put in front of the different schools. Free lunch, I don't believe, is necessary for all. I do believe that we should feed children that are in need, but like my family, my son goes to Denfeld, he's a senior there. We usually pack him a lunch and send it with him because he doesn't really care for what's being served, or the portions aren't large enough for him. So so I don't think that all these mandates are a good thing to fall back on. In fact, the 2023 legislative session was boosted by $2 billion, and they tied it now to inflation. So they had a historic, like we said, increase. Our schools need funding that is fair and flexible, and with setting measurable goals and then getting out of the way and letting it take its course. The 2024 Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment results showed 45% of Minnesota students reached grade level of standards in math. 49, not even 50% of students assessed proficient in reading, and 39.6% of students assessed proficient in science. So we can do better.
Thank you. And lastly, candidate Savela.
Can you repeat the question?
Surely. The question was, reports indicate that large numbers of students, in particular students from underrepresented groups, are not sufficiently proficient in reading and math, and that there are not sufficient course offerings in computer science. If elected, what, if anything, would you propose to remedy this?
Okay, thank you for repeating that.
No problem.
I'm ignoring the underrepresented groups because I think kids are kids, and I don't look at any one representation being more important than the other. But I do recognize that there is a problem. And what that means is maybe what we need to do in education is start focusing more on the fundamentals and, if necessary, doubling up on fundamentals. So getting rid of some extraneous classes that aren't necessarily needed and maybe not helping the kids as much. For example, ethnic studies, and more about doing maybe 2 classes in math a day, 2 classes in English a day to get their reading skills up, to get their math skills up. Because when a kid comes out of school, if he can't read, then that kid can't learn on its own. If you can't do math, then you're going to be struggling when you're doing any kind of financial analysis. As far as computer classes, I have a background in computer science. I know that we can do education for computer classes even without a computer in your hands. There are intuitive and innovative ways that we can teach people how to do programming if that's necessary. I think we really need to start thinking about whether or not computer science or computer programming is going to be the way of the future with AI advancing as much as it is. But if there are computer classes that we need, there's ways to do it even if you don't have the technology to do it.
Okay, thank you. The next question is in the area of gun legislation. During the last 2 Minnesota legislative sessions, a safe storage of firearms bill was introduced but not passed. The purpose of the law is to decrease suicides by gun, keep guns out of the hands of children, and prevent gun theft. If you were elected and a safe storage bill was introduced again, would you support mandating safe storage of firearms? Explain why or why not. And we will begin with candidate Savela.
I would not support such legislation. I think that's a violation of your personal privacy in your house, Fourth Amendment violation. But I think there's ways we can do this without passing legislation for it. When I was in junior high school, I took a gun safety class because I wanted to go hunting. It's the only reason you had to take a gun safety class at that time. So it wasn't because we just offered it in general, but if you wanted to go hunting when you were a certain age, you had to take a gun safety class so you were safe when you were out there with other people. I think this is something we should be teaching kids in school. I think gun safety demystifies weapons. I think it teaches them how to store them properly. And the right way to store a gun, honestly, if you want to be safe, is to lock it up, lock your ammunition separately from it. And people need to know that. It can't just be something you have to intuit when you're a first-time gun buyer. So I think there's ways to educate people without mandating it. I think we should keep government out of people's lives as much as possible. And I think we have to put the trust back into people to make sure that they can make the right decisions given the right information.
Thank you. And candidate McGrew.
I am also opposed to that. I think you need to be able to put parents, they need to start taking some responsibility to safely store their weapons or guns without being told to do so in such a certain way. I've also taught gun safety. I agree with candidate Savela that if you teach kids and take away that mystique about guns and teach them how to properly handle them, that it takes away the excitement or the allure to going and seeking them out. So I think also that they had the legislation where they tried to get it where you had to have your firearms in one place and your ammunition in another place. And for home protection, I think that's difficult because if someone comes in, you can't be opening up multiple safes and to protect yourself. And you need to have weapons available and ready to you. So thank you.
Okay, candidate Munger.
I'm going to find myself in agreement with my Republican colleagues here, and I'll tell you why. So when that bill was being proposed at the Minnesota House and Senate, I reached out to former County Attorney Mark Rubin, who's a close friend of mine, former St. Louis County Sheriff Ross Littman, and Deputy Kozlowski. And basically my question was, I read the bill. I actually read the bill in its entirety. And to me, setting aside that Minneapolis and St. Paul gun culture in terms of firearms in the home is much different than northeastern Minnesota. We could talk about that separately. But setting that aside, I was very concerned by the language of the bill that a law enforcement officer like Trooper McGrew would come home and not follow this statute, come home tired after a shift, and I'm not picking on him, I'm just using him as an example, tired after a shift, put his sidearm up on top of a credenza or whatever, still loaded, there might have been a kid around or whatever, and all of a sudden we have a law enforcement officer through really no fault of his or her own being charged with a crime. That didn't sit well with me as an ex-prosecutor. I have 12 firearms myself. They're all stored securely. All my ammunition's in a separate garage, locked, and I think that's what we need to do, but we need to do it, I agree, through education.
Okay, thank you. And same question for candidate Kozlowski.
Thank you. this is something that is on our hearts and our minds, and it lives in our bodies. As somebody who is a hunter, who is a parent, I also believe that this is something that we've taken common sense action on, and that common sense action that is proven to save lives is where we need to continue to go when we head back to the Capitol next session. It's also in the backdrop of September as Suicide Awareness Month. You know, I think that we need to really reckon with the fact that this is a public health crisis with the gun violence facing us, that there are a lot of things that we as adults can do. You know, my 10-year-old is looking at me, asks me nonstop after she comes home from school, like, why aren't we stopping these school shootings when that is the number one reason why our kids are dying, as we've seen, you know. And so in greater Minnesota, when we look at the increase of death by suicide is happening because of weapons and guns in the home. And so I absolutely support, I did support the passage of safe storage. We had about 8 hours of debate on that particular bill. We also passed universal background checks and banning binary triggers and preventing stock purchases. And so there's just a host of things that we need to continue to do, but I really think it's about finding our way back to each other as a state and how we uproot violence, whether that's investing in housing and violence prevention programs, and so much more. But it really has to stop with us and blaming it on the guns and putting it squarely there and not on the people of Minnesota.
Okay, thank you. The next question comes from another bill that was considered at the legislature last year but not passed, and in the area of health care and drug costs. Co-pay accumulators, or pharma companies, and co-pay maximizers, other organizations, offer discounts or coupons on the base price of a drug. When the base cost of a drug is discounted in this way, the resulting price is the base for the insurance company to calculate the copay. When this practice is banned, the base for insurance copay calculation is the original cost of the drug. Thus, the out-of-pocket cost to the patient is higher when the practice is banned. Explain your position on the Minnesota legislative initiative to ban copay accumulator and copay maximizer practices, and would you consider bringing it back for discussion and a vote in the new legislative session? And first up for this one is candidate Kozlowski.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the question. It's something that at the Capitol we really believe, and we came in at the legislature. I think we heard loud and clear from the people of District 8B in Eastern Duluth that healthcare is a basic human right, and that includes the medicines and other prescriptions that are vital, from chemo to insulin and beyond. And so, while I'm not as familiar with this particular piece of legislation in the Health and Human Services bill, it's something that I think we're going to continue to have conversations on. We've made big progress in really taking a look at, you know, how do we get more folks into affordable healthcare, with whether that be the public option. You know, I would really like to see us not tinkering around the edges and moving us towards a Minnesota health plan. You know, I've watched my dad, who was a Navy veteran, struggle to get access to the life-saving medicine that he needed, be denied, and to face rising costs. At the Capitol, there are very well-funded folks who are actually fighting, no matter what particular policy, as you're describing, comes across our desk, that there are insurance companies who are making millions and millions while families and working Minnesotans are continuing to be squeezed, and passing things like the drug prescription affordability board is proving to be very difficult. You know, we were able to cap the price of insulin to $35, and there's more work to do, and I look forward to getting to work with Duluthians and Minnesotans to figure it out, because healthcare is causing us to go into medical debt and beyond, and we need to alleviate that burden.
Thank you. Let's hear from candidate Munger.
So just like with the safe storage bill, I would have to look at the language. I'm an evidence-based practitioner. I was a lawyer and a judge, a city attorney. And so I've not read this bill, and I'd have to know what the details are in the weeds before I could say whether I would support it or not. But as a general statement, I certainly support attempting to get pharmaceutical prices down where folks can afford them. I think the federal government is starting to do that with the initiatives that just came out of the last couple of years with President Biden and Kamala Harris in charge. We missed a huge opportunity back when Medicare Part D came in. You know, remember that was a George W. Bush program. And we had the opportunity at that point to do the same thing the VA does, basically negotiate prices on drugs for those people within that program. We didn't do it. So now we find ourselves trying to pull that back and trying to reinvent the wheel a bit. So the answer is, I think I'm in favor of moving towards universal health care, and that doesn't mean you give up or leave your own plan if you like it, but I think moving towards Minnesota Care for All that want to be on that plan is a big step, and I think we need to move that way, and that includes prescription drugs.
Okay, let's hear from candidate Savela.
I hate to ask you to repeat it, but
Well, I'll try to summarize it. It's basically a proposal to try to keep the cost of drug co-pays down by not allowing copay accumulators, which are pharma companies, and copay maximizers to offer discounts or coupons based to lower the price of the drug. So starting with the original cost of the drug.
okay, that's good to know. Oh, thank you. On the surface, I would say, yes, I don't want to make copays go up. I think people are struggling enough with their healthcare costs. Insulin is a good example. $35, the patent for insulin was given to the world by the person who discovers it. It should be free at this point, or very close to free. So yes, I would be in favor of anything that didn't make us pay more for our copays, because a lot of people, they pay a lot of insurance already per month, and I don't need the insurance companies manipulating things so they can get even more money out of people, or the drug companies doing it so they can get more money out of people. So whatever that legislation is, I would have to look at it like Mr. Munger said, but on the surface of it, I'd say if it's preventing copays from going up for people, I would definitely be in support of that.
Okay, thank you. And candidate McGrew.
I, again, like candidate Munger, am a little bit analytical when it comes to law. I like to read it. I'm not a lawyer like he is, but I like to read it and interpret it and kind of absorb it. So I'm not familiar with this law, but I do believe healthcare costs are out of control. And I do agree with the capping the diabetic insulin copay at $35, or if it could be less feasibly to make both sides. I think, our medical companies produce drugs, but they also need to be fairly compensated. I'm not saying overly compensated, I'm just fairly compensated. But I do agree with caps if they're in both parties' interests. So I myself am a type 2 diabetic, so I rely on monthly medications to control and monitor that. So I appreciate that. I don't take insulin per se, but I take it something else. So anything that would help keep healthcare costs down, keep copays down. Everybody has a financial budget they have to make. So when you have these healthcare things that come up, it can be quite frightening to see large bills come in. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll go on to the next question. Minnesotans are getting older and we're not prepared for the gray wave. Will you support increases for senior care settings, such as nursing homes and assisted living settings, to help support wages and benefits of caregivers and to support quality care for our seniors? And we'll begin with candidate McGrew.
Absolutely, I would support anything out that helps the elderly. I had the, I don't know if I call it the opportunity, but my brother and I had to place my parents both into assisted living in 2016. My father passed away in 2019 at a memory care facility, and my mom passed away in 2021. The last full year of my mother's life, 2020, we paid out $95,000 for her coverage or her care for that year. Luckily, we had both my parents had pensions through the school district, so it helped offset some of the costs. But that started draining parents' bank accounts, and it can be done very quickly if someone doesn't have a pension to fall back on. So since 2020, the COVID timeframe, nursing home beds have seen a decline of 3,000 beds, and hospitals don't have anywhere to put people. In fact, the Star and Tribune just put out an article in January that said 65,000 days of care were avoidable if patients had somewhere to go. The article also stated that newly released financial data from Minnesota Hospital shows that 43 out of 118 had negative operating margins in 2022. So the hospitals aren't having places for these people to go. And so we need to build up the workforce and build up the infrastructure for the health care for elderly.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to candidate Savela.
I won't make you repeat this one.
Okay.
I think we need to look at it first and say, what is causing things to be so high priced for the nursing homes? Money may be a solution, but maybe we need to reduce some of the regulations that we've been putting on these health providers. Maybe we need to stop doing unfunded mandates like giving people 48 hours a year for anything time off. Because what that means is you're paying for the person's time when they're off and somebody to substitute for them. Everybody wants to take care of the elderly. I think they're one of, when you talk about kids, you talk about the elderly, it's not that they're comparable, but when you're at the end of life or you're getting very old, you don't have the opportunity to take care of yourself at that point. You need to be taken care of. So we do need to find the money for it. Maybe that comes into taking money away from something else to be able to fund this. What I'm trying to get at is a point where we're not just constantly piling on more and more taxes and more money to different areas. We have one pie. And so, yes, I think we should fund the elderly. I think it's a very important thing to do. And I think we need to do it by looking at what we're already putting on them so that it makes it more costly. And then if we get all that taken care of, then we maybe think about adding extra funding.
Thank you. Let's hear from candidate Munger on senior care.
So the way I look at it is this: for a long time, and we know that there's a crisis on the other end of the spectrum here in Duluth right now with respect to affordable daycare and safe daycare. That's been in the news for the last 3 days solidly. So we have taken steps with respect to the daycare side of things. We haven't solved the problem, but we've moved towards that. We've taken some steps to make sure that every child that goes to school doesn't go to school hungry, so they can actually learn when they're at school. We've taken care of a lot of the things at the front end of the spectrum, but we haven't done much with respect to elder care. And I went through the same thing that Mark did. My mother was in assisted living over the last 2 years. She passed in October from dementia. And so I went through that whole system as an educated person with 12 years of formal education, and I'll tell you, it is a nightmare to try to negotiate that, even with the navigators that are out there to help you do that. And the bottom line was, my mom received very good care, but there weren't enough people. She had one RN in her facility dealing with medications for 12 patients. There was another facility right across the road, 12 more. She was also up in Proctor, and she was also up in Hibbing. She commuted from Hibbing. We have to do better. And yes, we pay a lot of money for this service, for this care. Hundreds of thousands of dollars a year.
Thank you. And candidate Kozlowski.
Thank you. This is an area that, as somebody who was raised by my grandmother, who comes from a community who we call our elderly Mindamuyan, is the one that holds it all together. I'm really proud of the work that we did at the Capitol in my first term with the $2.5 billion that was invested in health and human services, and with a large chunk of that going for senior and elderly care, but also to support the workers and those whose hands and hearts are taking care of our loved ones. I know that looked like $285 million in nursing homes, including funding for our Duluth senior centers. We also did things to really make sure that we have safe staffing and adequate wages, that we're taking care of those who are taking care of our folks, like with the Nursing Home Workforce Board, really lifting the wage of PCAs and home care. One of the bills that I was proud to lead was to make permanent the Aging Council, that we're really looking at aging with the silver tsunami across housing and economic development. How do we make livable, walkable communities? Seniors want to age in place. We did things like eliminate the tax on Social Security, permanent property taxes to keep people in their homes for as long as possible. How do we make more connections so that seniors and children and families are able to nurture and spend time together? We really need to look at the delivery models and the methods, and also how we continue to support the workforce behind our seniors, and make sure that seniors are a valuable part of our communities going forward.
Thank you. We'll move on to a question about housing. Many people are finding rents or down payments and mortgages to be unaffordable. What can the state legislature do to expand access to housing for all? And we'll begin with candidate Kozlowski, excuse me.
Great. Well, this is something that I think the state has a really big role to play in, alongside our city and county and federal partners. I serve on the Housing Committee at the Capitol, and this year I was appointed to serve on the newly created supportive housing workforce, as well as really, as the champion for Minnesota housing this year, as a legislator award is an area that I said that I was going to hit the ground running on, because I know what it's like to couch surf. I know what it's like to lose my mom and my brother to homelessness, and I know now what it's like to be a first-gen home owner. And so with $1 billion investment, again, with record disinvestment in housing, and housing only making up 1% of the state budget, we really need to look at the trajectory of going forward. How do we create steady, dedicated, reliable funding so that the state's a good partner, and that we're continuing to make really strong investments in housing, so that there's not a cliff in the quadrupling of single family and apartment homes that we're able to make in Duluth and across the state. We put funds in the bonding bill and the housing infrastructure. We did both rental assistance as well as first-gen homeowner assistance, and the bills that I carried to get counseling, grants to help people get into home ownership. We know that that's one of the best ways to create generational wealth. We also need to look at how it is that we're taking care of what we have, but also we have a market that is 95% privatized. And so some of the things that I'd like us to continue to look forward is social housing, and how we create more state-created housing and invest in what we have and creates more.
Okay, candidate Munger.
Well, this is a personal issue for me, because I have a 26-year-old who is full-time, gainfully employed, who lives at my house. And he makes a good wage. He's a production guy. Unlike his 3 older brothers, he is not finished with college yet. He just started going to Lake Superior College, taking online courses to go into the computer area, computer forensics. But in any event, if he had to try to leave our home right now and find a place to rent in this Duluth area, mostly probably the core of the city of Duluth, he could not do it. The rents would be $1,200 to $1,500 for a single bedroom apartment, and that's just not affordable for him. That's probably about half of his take-home pay. So we need to do better with respect to building the housing, particularly affordable housing. We have low-income housing, Section 8. We have a lot of Taj Mahal buildings going up in and around Duluth that are very, very expensive. But the young people, the young families, there's no housing for them. We know that. There's a huge shortage. And it's not just here. It's across the nation. In fact, Ron DeSantis in the state of Florida implemented a program much like the one that's being proposed by Vice President Harris in terms of monies for first-time home buyers through the state as a grant in the state of Florida. And Ron DeSantis is not a crazy liberal.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear from candidate McGrew.
I do agree that housing is an issue. Certainly, in fact, like Mr. Munger here, my oldest son, Noah, recently asked me, he goes, Dad, because he's a senior at Stout, he's getting ready to graduate in May, have an interior design degree. He goes, Dad, how am I going to afford a house? And I said, that's a good question. We'll have to figure that out when the time comes, depending on what happens. But I think part of it is Over-regulation. I've talked to a few contractors in town, and a lot of different regulations that get tied in with building, particularly in Duluth. Some of them might be through the city, some of them might be through the state, or a combination thereof. But if we can reduce some regulation, that would reduce costs. A study by Housing First found that municipal fees and regulations in the Twin Cities found that up to a third of the cost of a new house were regulations and fees. So a house that could be built in Hudson was $47,000, might cost $82,000 in the Twin Cities. So I think we need to look at I'm not saying all mandates are bad, but I'm sure there are some that are unneeded. Let's wash out the things that aren't needed, that's ridiculous, and let's use the ones that make things safer, the housing community safer and more affordable.
Okay, thank you. And let's hear from candidate Savela.
Thank you. I lived through this myself. When I first got married, we had a child 10 months after I got married, and I had another child 2 years after. So at that point, my wife decided to stay home, and I was the sole income provider. And finding housing at that cost level was hard, but it was still $1,200 a month when I was doing it. So I understand the problem. One of the things we need to do, or one of the things we can help with at the state level, is look at easing some of the pressure on people as far as money goes. And one of the things about housing is property taxes are out of control. They're going up at a double-digit percentage sometimes every year. We've got really high energy costs, which translates into everything. Prices of food, prices of heating your house once you get it. Because a lot of people, they get a house and they think, wow, that's great. Now I'm not renting anymore. I've got a lower mortgage. Well, you've got a lot of other costs that come with it, and a lot of those have to do with energy costs being high. Some of the things I think we can't do is we can't strip zoning rights away from cities and give it to the state so they can decide how we're going to build houses. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The government is not in the business of creating housing for people. It's for creating the environment so that housing can get built. As far as Taj Mahals go, I haven't seen those in Duluth, but if you have all levels of housing, what you get is the higher end housing makes people move out of the middle level housing into those higher level housing. Lower end goes to the middle, and then it frees up people for the lower level. So there is a reason to build houses at every level.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is on childcare. What do you think the legislature should be doing to improve access to quality childcare? Please explain. And we'll begin with candidate Savela.
I just answered this question. It was the same thing. Yeah, we've just lost another 200 seats here. I saw this press conference they just did yesterday, and they were talking about the YWCA closing, and we're losing this childcare. Why are we losing all this? Well, one thing is the high regulations. They in the last session or two, they came up with this in-home daycare regulations, and they basically plopped the regulations that are for the high-end big institutional daycares. And I found something very interesting about that press conference too, and I'll talk about it a little bit. I saw a bunch of legislators walking up. One was Grant Huschild. He's notable to me. He came in and fire and brimstone. This is going to stop. We're going to drop money into this. There's people that don't want to spend money on child care, but too bad, we're going to do it. And that's kind of an exaggeration, summarization, but that's what he's saying. What I didn't hear was what we're missing in the legislature right now. I know people don't want to spend more on child care. Guess what? Maybe I have a plan to do it so that you don't have to spend an extra dollar. That gets people's interest. That's how you get people to come to the table and start talking about it. If the first thing you're doing is walking in and saying, you're not doing enough and we need to spend more on childcare, we need to do more, you're never going to get consensus. You're just going to have people dig in and want to fight you. So I think people that can bring to the table some compromise, figure out how to lower taxes, how to lower the energy costs, and reduce regulations will help.
Thank you. Let's go on to candidate McGrew.
I just was doing some research about childcare, and Minnesota put $300 million in new spending towards early childhood initiatives recently, an additional $252 million for early learning scholarships. So with all this $500 million, I'm just so surprised that with all this money that we just injected into the childcare industry, if you want to call it that, that we're having all these different places close up shop here. It's just confounding that we can put that much money in. We used my mother-in-law's childcare when we were working and our kids were young. So I know not everybody has that opportunity to do that. Families do help out definitely if you live within the community that your family is, that you grow up in, that kind of thing. But it's just, we need to help out the community centers, especially the privately owned ones, by reducing some of the onerous regulations that are tying their hands and costing them money. And again, it's just the over-regulation deal where we need to look at what's on the books and what's really needed and what can be disposed of and gotten rid of to help out the business owners that are trying to run businesses in Duluth. So with that $500 million, it just confounds me that we're in this situation that we're in right now.
Thank you. And let's hear from candidate Kozlowski.
Great. Childcare is an issue that, it requires all hands on deck. And that's one of the things that our Duluth, our Twin Ports, our greater Minnesota communities, Minnesota is stepping up to do. Our childcare providers, our families have been saying for years and getting louder and louder that, we're at a cliff, and here we are. And, at the legislature, we've taken the first time in ever investments of over $1.3 billion to, again, plug the hole of disinvestment. And this is what happens when we have a pay-to-play system in a system that's broken and failing. And I would say we also have a childcare system that is built off of the backs of particularly moms and non-binary parents, on people of color. We hear some folks say the solution is just have a grandparent or a family member step in and do the work. And I can tell you that as a parent with a kid in an after-school program who knows that there's over 70 families on the waiting list to having a cousin who is a frontline healthcare worker, that I'm the backup plan for her 2 kids. And it means either making tough choices of putting food on the table or going to work. And so we're going to continue to make those investments, that we have ample in-home child care centers, after-school programming. What that might look like, things like emergency funding, the Great Start program. But we need to pay educators what they're worth. We need to make it so that there's investment in the same way that they're sacrificing for our kids, and making it affordable for our families, which right now it is not. And we're going to get there slowly.
Thank you. And we'd like to hear from candidate Munger.
Thank you. So 3 of my sons, I have 4 sons, 3 of my sons are married with children. They've all gone through this, and they all have, they're not at the lower income levels or not even at the modest income levels. They have really good paying jobs, either they or their spouses or the combination of the two. And child care costs have been crushing them. Thankfully, 5 of my 6 grandkids now have aged into elementary school, and the child care conundrum is not affecting them. We still have one down in St. Paul, and it's a huge expense for 2 professionals to fund that daycare. Yes, you could have an option where a parent stays home. That's what we did. That's what my wife and I did for 3 of our 4 kids. When we got to our last child, who's 17 years difference between he and his oldest brother, my wife went back, got her master's degree while raising 3 kids, and she went back to work. And at that point, we had to find daycare ourselves, and it was almost impossible. We, like Trooper McGrew, we used family members when our youngest son was very young, because he was not able to go to a daycare yet because of the requirements of the daycares. So eventually he ended up in a very high quality daycare, and when he made it to school and my wife was still working, he got the benefit of Kids Zone in Hermantown, which is a program that is an after school program, which some of the money that Representative Kozlowski and the others passed through last time assists that. So there's steps being taken, more needs to be done.
Okay, thank you. I believe we have time for one more question, and I'm going to give you a choice of questions. One is
What if it's a 2-2 tie?
You can do whichever one you want.
Yeah, right.
So you can discuss the North Star Express and tell us what your thoughts are on the North Star Express train between Duluth and St. Paul, Minneapolis area. Do you support the project or oppose it, and why? Or you can discuss what one issue you think is the most important to work with legislators from across the aisle, bipartisan legislation. So the North Star Express, or what would you like to work with other legislators from the other party? And we'll begin with Mark, with candidate Munger.
So we can pick, we get to individually pick? Ah, okay.
Yes.
Personal choice, man.
Well, since very little, and we never got around to describing what 3B looks like, so I'll say that right off the top. 3B only includes in the city of Duluth, Gary, New Duluth, and Fond du Lac. Majority of my district is Proctor, Hermantown, Rice Lake, 2 harbors, and 14 townships north. So I'm gonna put the train issue aside because it doesn't affect a big portion of my, my district. I think the last topic we talked about, childcare, is one where we can come to common ground. If instead of calling names, instead of throwing stones, instead of being negative, and I made a promise at our forum on Tuesday that my campaign will never go negative against my opponent. My opponent did not make that promise. You didn't hear that out of her during that forum. And so I'll make that promise. So I think that is a place that we can come to common ground. We all love our children. We all love our grandchildren. I think daycare and childcare, whether it's home-based, whether it's at a school, whether it's a private company that runs it, I think we can come to some common ground with respect to that, and that's something we need to do, and do it quickly.
Thank you. Let's hear from candidate Kozlowski.
I'm going to thread the needle on this one because actually the Northern Lights Express is a bonding project that we were able to pass in the last session in 2023 with the historic $2.6 billion bonding bill. And I believe that that is a bill that sticks out as one, a top priority heading into the next legislative session, but it requires a supermajority, and so we need to come together to work hand in glove and pass a bonding bill. We have a one Duluth community and not competing interests, and so when we talk about things like the Northern Lights Railroad and why that was so important to invest in, it's veterans healthcare, it's tourism, we talk about workforce development, it's attracting and recruiting folks to come work here, you know, to our community that is increasingly diverse. We have went on the bonding tour and traveled to over 70 cities. We received over $17 billion in requests from everything from community theaters and groups that are going to support small businesses, childcare facilities, to modernizing higher education and beyond. And these are projects that are leaving our communities behind, but also not protecting the things that we need, like clean drinking water, you know, roads and bridges that are in desperate need of repair. But also, this is one of the surest ways to invest in communities of color, to invest in our future, to make our communities climate resilient. And so that is the commitment that when we go back to the Capitol, to really bring home those dollars to support Duluth, to support Greater Minnesota, and to make a stronger Minnesota.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear from candidate Savela on the train or bipartisanship.
I'm going to do both as well, because I think the train falls into one of my bigger priorities. A train is $200 million. That's the beginning. I lived out in Hawaii. They had a train that went 26 miles, and it was 4.5 times over budget and still being constructed. This is an unnecessary thing we don't need, and I think we need to get a hold of all the spending we're doing. So one of my top priorities going down to the Twin Cities is to get control of the spending. $200 million for for a train rail, $700 million for a new state capitol or a new building, $250 million in fraud. That alone, just one thing, Feed Our Family fraud, leading up to $500 million in fraud. You know, a couple $100 million here, a couple $100 million there. That starts to add up to real money after a while. We need to get a hold of that. And so my priority going down to the Twin Cities, my priority in the first session is to get a stop of the spigot. It seems like we have a teenager that got a hold of their parents' credit card and they don't know when to stop. I've heard a line somebody said 2 days ago that said, we don't have a surplus as long as we have one homeless person. That should give you the idea of how they view spending and what they think of as what the state has and what it should do. The state doesn't produce money. It doesn't produce anything. It takes money from people and then it decides how to spend it. We need to stop the egregious spending that we've been doing the last couple of years.
Okay, thank you. And we'll hear from candidate McGrew.
I guess I'll talk about both in a way as well. So I'm going to kind of echo a little bit about what candidate Savela said. The Northern Lights, it starts at 200 million. I think light rail in the Twin Cities is showing that costs always over exceed what they say it's going to be. So I can see this starting at 200 million, and who knows where it might end. Again, the fiscal spending, the Democrats had full control of the legislature and all branches of government down there at St. Paul last time, and they spent $17.5 billion in a matter of 5 months. Okay, so $750 million for a new office building when people are struggling to make ends meet in this inflationary time. I think they probably didn't need to do that. And then the Feeding Our Future scandal, the $250 million that was doled out to a non-existent company to feed children, and it was a failure. Approximately 70 people have been charged in that now by the federal government. So we need, and only about 50 million has been recovered, and I don't suspect that much more will be recovered. So in addition, the frontline worker pay, they paid another 200 million out to fraud there. So all these different aspects of fraud that are coming in, we need to put bipartisanship, come together and tackle this fraud. Think of how much more money we would have to dish out to other people and other programs.
Okay, thank you. At this time, we'll ask each candidate to give a 2-minute closing statement. And we'll hear first from candidate Kozlowski.
Great. Well, thank you again to the League of Women Voters and to the people of Duluth for tuning in from wherever you are. I am really looking forward as a marathoner to continue doing the hard yards for Duluth, from bringing the capital to the community and Duluthians down to the Capitol and to the halls of power. As somebody who went from running the streets of Duluth and a kid who you could call the street fighter, no matter what somebody calls me, who went on to become a business developer, who worked in higher education, a grassroots organizer, to working right here at the City of Duluth as our community relations officer, and now to state rep. I have shown that I have the proven experience and the stamina and the tenacity and also the political courage to continue to fight with and for the people of Duluth and for the needs of not only right now, but for our future generations to come. And it really has been about shifting government to make it more responsive to the people and making it accountable to the people, to our land, air, and water as well. I don't think it's radical to say that every single person deserves to have a place to call home at night, to have affordable childcare, to count on clean drinking water, and access to health care, and knocking door by door and block by block, listening sessions and beyond. I know that the biggest solutions to our problems lie right here in the strength of our community. And there's a really clear choice if we're gonna have a government that holds us back, or if we're gonna have the ability to move forward and have each other's backs. And it's gonna absolutely take all of us doing this work and coming together to not repeal, to fight for our hard-earned labor victories, to fight for our bodily autonomy and gender freedoms, for our multiracial democracy. And I can tell you that I'm all in. I believe that we are creating a new world together, and that if in the silence of coming together and gathering and circling together, that as a community we can actually hear it and speak it and move it into existence, and that's what we are doing. And so I'm all in, Duluth, and I'm asking for you to be all in again, and for your vote and for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's have your closing statement, candidate Munger.
Again, thank you to the League, and thank you for PACT-TV for having all of us here. We may have different views, but we're all American citizens. We're all here because we want to serve our constituents in the best way we think possible. I don't think any of us are in this for anything other than that. I started my journey seeking this office after 40 years as a public servant, as a prosecutor and a judge. This is not something I need to do. It's not something my ego drives me to do. When you've been a district court judge, you deal with the day-to-day lives of people in some of the worst times of their lives. Very few things that you do as a district court judge are happy days in the courthouse. Adoptions and weddings. And sometimes the weddings, later on, they don't go so good. But adoptions usually turn out just fine. But beyond that, I'm looking at the landscape, and the reason I am running is exactly what I said at the very beginning. For my grandchildren and your grandchildren, I just think the vitriol, the attack ads, the bashing of other human beings because they might think slightly different or look differently or practice religion differently, that's not America. That's not who we are. And so I think I can bring some common sense to St. Paul, cut through all of that stuff, and let's get back to doing the work of the people. And it's partially because on the national level, we've had folks tell us, well, we've got a beautiful plan for the Affordable Care Act. We're going to replace it. That was 9 years ago. We've got a beautiful plan for infrastructure. Never happened. That's filtered down to the Republican Party of the state of Minnesota. We need to get back to being the Republican Party on the other side that I can talk to and have discussion about conservative values in terms of fiscal conservancy and projects that benefit our constituents, not talk about social issues and get into social wars. Go to Munger4mn.com and learn more. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's have a closing statement from candidate McGrew.
So I also want to thank the League and PACT-TV for hosting this event. It's been very good. We need to get out people's opinions and their voices. So I want to cover the main tenets during this political season that I'm going to be going down to St. Paul for. Public safety is a big one. Crime may be statistically down between 2022 and 23, but I prefer to use 2019 as a standard by which we measure, because 2019 I look at as more of a neutral time or more of a stable time. You figure 2020 came upon COVID and George Floyd, and the unrest just rose and rose. I spent 2 weeks down in the Twin Cities during George Floyd, protecting the Capitol as a state trooper. But according to the BCA, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension in Minnesota, the 2019 to 2023 comparison of 4 types of crime, biased crime is currently up 23%. Violent crime is up 48%. Murder is up 54%. So crime may be trending down statistically for a short period of time, but it's significantly up in these more interesting or terrible places that it should be. Motor vehicle theft is also up 36.8%. And a study has shown that motor vehicle theft is a precursor to violent crime trending up, and Minnesota crime numbers affirm that. Fiscal responsibility is also a thing, and I just spoke a little bit about that I'm going down there. I want to curb some spending and bring some conservatism back into the thought lines of spending money. And then support of veterans is my last one. Veterans make up about 300,000 people in Minnesota. 105 veterans died by suicide in 2022, and 752 Minnesota veterans were on the registry of homelessness, and 146 of those are recurring homelessness. So we need to do something for the vets in our state. They have given up so much. So thank you.
Okay, and let's hear a closing statement from candidate Savela.
Thank you. Thank you again for having this forum. I just want to say this is going to be a very important election. There's lots of topics that we have to go over. They've asked some really good questions here today. I've gone to a couple other forums. They asked different questions. But we've got so many more things to talk about. We've got this push to make Minnesota a sanctuary state. This is going to overrun our state, and we really need to have that conversation whether this is something we want. I have a question with that. Does that include the native reservations? Are we going to be putting up illegal immigrants there as well? Nobody's talked about that yet. We have high ER waiting rooms. It's going to get worse. We have housing crunch. It's going to get worse. We need to look out for our citizens here. That's our job as a representative. This is a representative republic. We need to be representing the people here that are paying taxes, that are living here, and let the citizens from other countries go back to their countries. If they want to come back here, do it legally, but take care of their own state, their own country. We can't keep doing it. I don't have a silver bullet, but what I do have is the ability to walk into a room and know how to negotiate with people and bring something. If you want something, bring something. Know how to make a deal and work with people so that you get something done. So I will urge you to really study the candidates. If they're an incumbent, look at their record. If they're not an incumbent, you just have to take their word for what they're saying and make sure it's consistent. And know who you're voting for. And when you do, back it up. If you're voting for somebody who wants to increase taxes, don't you dare take a property tax decrease or any kind of exemption that you can take. If you could afford it, pay your taxes because that's what you're voting for. If you think that government should be for individual rights and people should be able to keep as much money as possible in their pocket but still supporting the people in the state, then make sure you make that decision. But I urge you to vote. Early voting starts on Friday. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. This concludes the candidate forum for Minnesota House of Representatives in District 3B, 8A, and 8B. It is our purpose in sponsoring events such as this to provide you with an opportunity to hear the candidates discuss the issues that are important to you. There is never enough time to cover all of the issues in a limited time setting such as this. If your questions were not addressed, you should feel free to contact the candidates directly. We hope this helps you learn more about the candidates and issues so that you can make informed choices at the polls on Tuesday, November 5th. We thank the candidates, PACT-TV, and the viewers of this forum. PACT-TV will broadcast this forum and others. Check their listings for a schedule of times. The forums will also be posted on the League of Women Voters of Duluth website, which is lwvduluth.org. Thank you all.